It's terrible that after 50 years, it is behind closed doors.
The palace had prepared for another quiet morning. But one private exchange shattered that calm in seconds. Prince Edward entered Catherine's sitting room, carrying a locked velvet case once associated with Diana. When he opened it, the emerald tiara inside seemed to carry decades of grief, loyalty, and unfinished history. Then Edward delivered the sentence Camilla had fought to prevent. The jewel now belonged in Catherine's care. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine stared at the emeralds but did not reach for them. Edward placed the case before her, turned it toward her, and waited. No aide stood nearby. Her eyes filled, and when she spoke, she whispered Diana's name, as though saying it too loudly might break something neither could repair. For years, the tiara had remained outside normal royal circulation, because the family could not agree on who should inherit its weight after Diana's death. It was not merely jewelry, it had become a test of memory, loyalty, and the right to shape the past. Edward had served as its custodian, under a family arrangement, an agreement giving him responsibility to release the piece only when he believed the right person and moment had arrived. Now he made that choice. He gifted Diana's emerald tiara to Catherine, and rejected Camilla's written request to absorb it into her ceremonial collection, the group of jewels used by the reigning queen for duties. The decision struck Catherine from both directions. Accepting it meant carrying Diana's legacy before the world. Refusing it could allow that legacy to be renamed or quietly claimed by someone else. Edward then revealed how close the threat had come. Camilla's request had arrived 48 hours earlier, arguing that the emeralds should pass into the Queen's collection. His refusal rejected her claim and challenged her authority. Then he reached beneath the lining and removed a handwritten note. Diana had written it years before, and the custodian had never shown it beyond the family circle. He told Catherine that those words had helped decide everything. Before she could ask what they said, William entered, saw the open case, and stopped. He did not smile. He looked from his wife to his uncle, and asked whether Camilla had already been informed. Edward answered that she knew, and that she had demanded a meeting before the transfer became permanent. Before Catherine could understand the full weight of the emeralds now resting before her, she had to understand the three people whose grief, ambition, and loyalty had turned one tiara into a battle for the soul of the monarchy. To the public, it was a magnificent royal jewel. To Catherine, it was a responsibility she had never asked to inherit. To Edward, it was a promise that had survived death, scandal, and silence. But to Camilla, the emerald tiara represented something far more dangerous, proof that Diana's presence still possessed the power to outrank her. Beneath palace ceremony, three private wounds were about to collide. Catherine had spent years living beneath comparisons she never invited. Every gesture, every silence, and every public appearance could be measured against Diana. Yet she had always resisted becoming an imitation of the woman William had lost. Now the tiara threatened to change that balance. Accepting it could look like a public coronation of memory, as though she had been chosen to complete Diana's unfinished story. Refusing it, however, could leave that story vulnerable to alteration. When Catherine spoke privately with William, she admitted that she feared the jewel would be used as a weapon against another woman. She did not want tragedy turned into triumph. The prince understood, but his grief carried a harder edge. He told her that his mother's jewels could not disappear into a ceremonial collection, meaning the group of pieces used by the reigning queen for official duties, where their history might be softened, renamed, or politically reshaped. For him, Edward's gift offered relief, but it also reopened a wound he had never fully escaped. Camilla felt that wound from the opposite side. She sat alone reading Edward's rejection letter, her fingers tightening when she reached the sentence stating that ceremonial rank could not erase personal provenance, the documented history showing where an object came from and whom it truly represented. The words made her feel diminished before the decision had even become public. After finishing, she placed the letter face down, beside a framed photograph of Charles. When he entered, she asked only, "Did you know?" The king hesitated. That silence wounded her more deeply than any confession. He admitted that he had known his brother was reviewing the tiara's future, but had deliberately refused to influence him. Charles believed distance might prevent another family fracture. She heard abandonment. Edward carried a different burden. In a recorded private conversation, preserved by his household secretary, he told Sophie that affection for Catherine had not been the only reason behind his decision. The trusted confidant watched his expression change as he explained that something had happened months earlier, something that convinced him Camilla intended to alter the jewel's history once it entered her collection. Sophie asked him to name the moment. He paused, then finally identified the ceremony where the queen consort had crossed a line no one inside the family could ignore. The conflict had not begun when Edward opened the velvet case. It began months earlier, during one carefully rehearsed ceremony where a single private demand changed everything. Months before Catherine saw the emerald tiara, the royal family gathered for what should have been a controlled anniversary ceremony at Windsor. Every movement had been rehearsed, every jewel selected, every name approved. But shortly before the doors opened, Camilla made a private request that stunned Edward. She did not merely ask to wear Diana's emeralds, she demanded that their official history be rewritten before they appeared. Edward had temporarily brought several historic jewels from protected storage for the Windsor Legacy reception, a ceremony created to honor royal women whose public service had shaped the modern monarchy. During the final review, Camilla noticed that Diana's emerald tiara had been listed separately as a personal legacy piece rather than part of the sovereign's active ceremonial collection, the group of jewels controlled for official use by the monarch and the reigning queen. She immediately questioned why it had not been placed under her authority. Then the request became an order. The queen consort privately instructed him to approve the tiara for her appearance and change the printed program so it described the piece only as an historic crown emerald piece. Diana's name would vanish. Edward closed the program folder and slid it back across the table. No aides were present. He told Camilla that he would not authorize the change. She remained seated, but her expression hardened as she said the monarchy could not be governed by sentiment. He heard something colder beneath those words. To him, memory was not sentiment when the public record and family promises were involved. The prince replied that Diana's connection to the emeralds was documented and personal, and removing her name would not modernize the monarchy. It would falsify its history. Camilla reminded him that she stood beside the king and carried responsibilities no other royal woman held. Edward answered calmly that rank created duties, not ownership over every story that came before her. The discovery that followed changed everything. After the confrontation, Edward found a revised inventory draft prepared by Camilla's office. An inventory was the formal record identifying royal objects, their history, and who controlled them. Diana's name had been removed from several emerald pieces, proving the request was not spontaneous. He carried the draft directly to Charles. The king read it in silence, folded the pages, and looked suddenly exhausted. He gave no order. Instead, the monarch told his brother to do whatever protected the family's integrity. Edward returned to the tiara that evening and signed a private memorandum, a written record of his intended decision, naming Catherine as its future recipient when the right moment arrived. The Windsor confrontation stayed buried until Camilla learned that he had acted. What began with a rewritten program at Windsor was now moving toward a closed palace room, where Edward and Camilla would finally say aloud what years of royal restraint had kept buried. When Camilla entered Edward's private study, there were no secretaries, no equerries, and no carefully prepared statements to protect either of them. The emerald tiara had already been offered to Catherine, but the transfer had not yet been entered into the final family register. Camilla believed there was still time to reverse it. Edward knew the meeting would decide far more than the ownership of a jewel. Camilla carried her original claim request in one hand and the rejected inventory amendment in the other. She expected Edward to reconsider once he faced the humiliation of publicly contradicting the Queen. He had already placed the transfer memorandum on the desk, a formal written record confirming who would receive the jewel, but the final signature was still missing. His decision was morally settled. The process was not. She closed the door herself and asked whether he understood what he was doing to her. Edward remained standing. Refusing an improper claim, he said, was not humiliation. It was protection. Camilla's anger broke open. She accused him of rewarding Catherine for embodying the memory of a woman whose shadow had followed her through every year of marriage. Her voice faltered for only a second, but it exposed the wound beneath the fury. Edward heard it. He softened, yet he did not retreat. He told her that comparison had been cruel, but taking Diana's jewel and removing Diana's name would not heal that pain. It would deepen it. The queen consort pulled a chair away from the desk, but refused to sit. When he said Catherine had already accepted the responsibility, she pushed the chair back sharply and demanded to know whether Charles had authorized the betrayal. Edward answered carefully. The king had not chosen Catherine, but he had given his brother full freedom to protect the jewel's history. That truth landed harder than any accusation. Camilla understood instantly that Charles had possessed the power to intervene and had chosen silence. She then produced a second document, claiming the tiara should automatically enter the Queen's ceremonial holdings, the official collection used by the reigning monarch's wife for state duties. Edward turned to a hidden clause. Personally entrusted legacy pieces, he explained, were excluded from that rule because their ownership depended on private family promises, not rank. The room went still. Edward picked up his pen and signed the final transfer in front of her. He stated plainly that Diana's emerald tiara now belonged to Catherine's custodianship and could not be claimed by Camilla's office. She stared at the signature, then left without another word. But she was not finished. Her next move would go beyond Edward. Edward had ended the argument in his study, but Camilla was already carrying the wound toward Charles, where marriage, kingship, and memory would be forced into the same impossible choice. Charles had spent years trying to keep the monarchy moving forward, without allowing its past to consume every decision. Yet when Camilla placed Edward's signed transfer before him, the past returned in emeralds, handwriting, and silence. She did not ask him to judge a legal technicality. She asked him to prove that his wife's place beside him mattered more than the memory of Diana, and Charles knew any answer would carry a cost. Charles possessed enormous symbolic power, but even the king could not simply seize a family jewel entrusted through a private agreement without weakening the rules protecting other royal heirlooms. Those agreements mattered because they stopped personal gifts from being swallowed by rank alone. He also understood the public danger. Overruling Edward for Camilla would look like an attempt to erase Diana's memory. Supporting Catherine could fracture his marriage. After the queen consort left, he read the signed memorandum alone. A memorandum was a formal written record confirming the transfer and the reasoning behind it. When he reached the clause mentioning Diana's sealed note, the monarch removed his glasses and set the file down without speaking. Camilla returned before he had reached a decision. She demanded clarity, and told him that neutrality was not neutral when his silence always seemed to favor those who still mourned his former wife. Charles did not raise his voice. He told her he could not repair the pain of the past by confiscating its symbols. She had his life, his loyalty, and his place beside the throne. But Diana's personal history could not be handed over merely to prove devotion. The words wounded her, yet he refused to soften them. Charles summoned Edward and William separately. His brother confirmed every step, every clause, and every signature. The prince arrived later and said Catherine would return the tiara if ordered, but such a command would permanently change how he viewed his father's judgment. Charles walked toward the window, paused, and asked whether she truly wanted the jewel. William answered that his wife wanted to protect what it meant, not possess what it was. That distinction broke through the king's hesitation. Charles finally opened Diana's note. Her words asked that the emeralds one day be worn by a woman who understood duty without using them to compete with another woman. The message ended the argument. He refused Camilla's appeal, formally recognized Edward's transfer, and ordered the palace register, the official record of royal ownership and history, to preserve Diana's name in every future description. Ownership was settled. Peace was not. Within hours, the Queen withdrew from a major appearance, while Catherine began to understand the true cost of accepting the gift. Charles had protected the decision, yet the moment his signature dried, the palace began absorbing the shock, and no one felt the new reality more sharply than the woman who had been refused. The first sign of the fallout was not an angry statement or a leaked document. It was an empty chair. Hours after Charles upheld Edward's decision, Camilla withdrew from a private Commonwealth reception she had spent weeks preparing to host. Palace staff offered a routine explanation, but inside the royal residence, everyone understood what the absence meant. The battle over Diana's emeralds had become a visible fracture beside the throne. The palace tried to contain the damage by calling the transfer a private family matter, but the sudden changes in schedules made secrecy almost impossible. Catherine was advised not to wear the emeralds immediately, because any appearance could look like celebration at Camilla's expense. The tiara was moved into protected Kensington custody, secure royal storage controlled by her household, while its ownership records were updated. Across the palace, every careful decision revealed the same truth. The jewel had changed hands, but the pain had not. Camilla sat fully dressed for the Commonwealth reception, a gathering linking representatives from nations connected through the voluntary Commonwealth Association. Yet she removed her brooch minutes before departure. She told her dresser that she would not enter a room where every glance would measure whether she had lost influence. Charles found her beside an unopened jewelry case. She asked whether he felt relieved. The king answered no, but admitted that reversing Edward's choice would have created an even deeper injustice. The queen consort replied that Catherine did not need another symbol of public affection. She had spent years earning acceptance, only to watch it disappear whenever Diana's name returned. He heard the hurt, but he could not undo the ruling without betraying the principle he had just defended. Catherine received the news at Kensington Palace and felt guilt strike immediately. She asked William whether returning the tiara in private might stop the damage. The prince closed the velvet case before she could lift the jewel. He told his wife that surrendering it out of guilt would not restore peace. It would teach the family that pressure could overturn any promise connected to his mother. She understood his fear, yet she could not accept a victory built on another woman's humiliation. Edward soon received an unsigned warning that palace factions intended to portray his decision as an attack on the queen. Sophie studied the language and recognized phrases used by members of Camilla's senior household circle. Charles reacted swiftly, ordering both households to stop briefing against one another and warning that any attempt to manipulate the press would lead to staff removals. The institutional fight paused, but Catherine refused to let bitterness become permanent. She decided to meet Camilla alone. The emerald tiara had divided offices, schedules, and loyalties, but the turning point would come without documents or witnesses, when Catherine crossed a quiet room to face Camilla woman to woman. Catherine did not summon Camilla through official channels. She sent a handwritten note asking for 20 private minutes and promising that the emerald tiara would not be in the room. When they met, neither woman brought an aide. There were no lawyers, no husbands, and no royal titles spoken between them. For the first time since Edward's gift, the conflict was stripped of power and reduced to pain. Catherine had chosen a small private drawing room away from both principal households, so neither woman would appear to be entering the other's territory. That mattered, because even the location could have turned a personal conversation into another contest over influence. Camilla had agreed reluctantly, knowing that refusal would strengthen the belief that she valued the jewel above family peace. She arrived guarded and expected Catherine to defend the decision. Instead, Catherine began quietly. She said she was sorry for the hurt, but not for protecting Diana's name. Camilla looked away, then asked whether she understood what it felt like to enter a room and be compared with a dead woman before saying a single word. The question carried years of anger, humiliation, and exhaustion. Catherine did not deny it. She admitted that she lived under comparison too, only from the opposite direction. Every gesture she made was measured against Diana, and the tiara frightened her because wearing it could make the world forget she was a separate person. Camilla's expression shifted. In a private account later recorded by the household secretary, she confessed that her claim had been driven partly by fear. Bringing the emeralds into her ceremonial collection, the group of jewels used for official royal duties, had seemed like proof that the monarchy had finally accepted her without reservation. Catherine answered with painful honesty. Acceptance could not be created by removing another woman's name. The queen consort could be honored for her own service without inheriting every object tied to Diana. Silence followed. Then Camilla reached across the table and turned Catherine's untouched teacup toward her. The gesture was small, but it changed the room. She agreed not to challenge the transfer again, and promised to withdraw her claim in writing. Her only request was that Catherine never wear the emeralds as a celebration of her defeat. Catherine gave her word. The first appearance would honor Diana's humanitarian legacy, not palace rivalry, and she would speak of continuity rather than replacement. Their understanding ended the personal war, but secrecy was already collapsing. By morning, one unforgettable image would carry the private settlement into every home in Britain. Catherine and Camilla left the room without affection, but with something more valuable than victory, an agreement that would be tested the moment Britain saw Diana's emeralds again. By sunrise, the secret was no longer confined to palace rooms. The transfer appeared across broadcasts, front pages, and phones before the royal household could issue its full explanation. Yet the public response was shaped by one photograph above all others. Catherine standing beside Edward with Diana's emerald tiara secured in its open case, not wearing it, not celebrating, but holding a handwritten legacy statement between them. The palace moved quickly. Its announcement confirmed that Edward had gifted the tiara to Catherine, that Charles had formally recognized the transfer, and that Camilla had withdrawn her request after a private family discussion. The statement also made one point impossible to miss. The jewel would remain permanently tied to Diana's name and would appear only at events connected to service, remembrance, or national duty. That promise mattered because it transformed the emeralds from a prize of rank into a protected symbol of memory. The public reaction exploded when one major newspaper printed the headline, "Diana's Emeralds Find Their Keeper," above the photograph of Catherine and Edward beside the open case. Her expression was solemn, not triumphant, and that single detail changed the mood. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates carrying flowers and handwritten cards honoring Diana. One woman held a sign reading, "Memory is not rivalry." Broadcasters repeated the phrase throughout the day because it captured what the palace had struggled to explain. Edward watched the coverage with Sophie and became visibly emotional when a commentator described his decision as the protection of a promise rather than an attack on Camilla. The trusted confidant reached for his hand, and he admitted in a recorded household account that he had feared the family would see only conflict, never duty. Across the palace, Camilla paused over the same front page at breakfast. She then instructed an aide to release her signed withdrawal so the public would understand that the challenge had ended. Catherine recorded a brief statement of her own. She said she accepted the tiara with humility and would never use it to imitate, replace, or compete with Diana. Then the palace released one authorized line from the private note. The emeralds should pass to someone who carried duty without turning memory into conquest. The words changed the story. Coverage moved away from rivalry and toward reconciliation. Even skeptical voices accepted that preserving Diana's name while recognizing Catherine's role gave the jewel a clear future. Britain had already decided what the emeralds represented, but the story would become complete only when Catherine faced Edward, William, Charles, and Camilla, with Diana's legacy resting openly before them. The final moment did not come at a glittering state banquet. It came during a private family gathering held before Catherine's first official appearance with the emerald tiara. Edward carried the case one last time. Charles brought Diana's note. William stood beside his wife, and Camilla entered knowing the jewel would never be hers. No one could undo the conflict, but they could decide what meaning survived it. The family gathered in a private Windsor chamber, before Catherine attended a charitable anniversary devoted to causes once supported by Diana. That choice mattered. It ensured the tiara would return through service rather than rank, and through remembrance rather than victory. Edward opened the case and placed the emeralds before Catherine. She did not reach for them. Instead, she asked Charles to read the approved passage from Diana's note aloud. The king hesitated over the first words, then forced himself to continue. William lowered his head. Edward placed one hand against the back of a chair, as decades of grief returned to the room. Camilla stepped forward before the silence could harden. She told Catherine that she would not contest the transfer again, and admitted that removing Diana's name had been a mistake, born from insecurity, not duty. Catherine thanked her without triumph. She said the jewel would never be worn against anyone, and that protecting Diana's memory did not require diminishing the queen consort's service. Edward then explained why he had chosen her. She understood the difference between inheritance and possession. His gift was not proof that one royal woman had defeated another. It was a demand that history be treated honestly. Charles made that principle permanent. He ordered a palace protocol, a binding internal rule, protecting personally associated legacy jewels from being renamed, absorbed, or reassigned without full family consent. Diana's identity would remain secured within the official royal record. William then fastened the final clasp as Catherine prepared to leave. He told his wife quietly that his mother's memory was safe, not simply because the tiara had returned, but because no one in that room was pretending she had never existed. Catherine wore Diana's emerald tiara to the charitable anniversary, with its history publicly acknowledged. Camilla attended beside Charles wearing jewels connected to her own service. In that moment, the monarchy rejected the belief that one woman's legitimacy required another woman's erasure. Edward's gift became a turning point. Catherine accepted responsibility without claiming Diana's identity. Camilla released a battle she could never truly win. Charles chose honesty over avoidance, and William saw his mother protected without vengeance. And so the emerald tiara ceased to be a prize in a royal struggle. Diana's name remained, Catherine became its guardian, Camilla abandoned her claim, and the monarchy finally moved forward without demanding that the past disappear. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.